Now to the ongoing border crisis in the US. It's certainly hurting President Joe Biden in the polls. NBC News polling shows the GOP now holds an 18-point lead when it comes to handling immigration. And also there's been recent polls, Josh, showing that Donald Trump is eating into Biden's lead among Latino voters. That would be something that would be concerning the Democrats. And we know a lot of those voters care about this issue. We've seen a few Democrats like Eric Adams speak out about the illegal immigration crisis, but does the Biden White House have any intention to tackle this crisis in any meaningful way in the lead up to the 2024 election?
No, on the contrary, they are suing Ken Paxton, Greg Abbott, and the state of Texas for Texas's attempts to put some buoys in the Rio Grande, trying to secure Texas's territorial sovereignty against the Mexican drug cartels and, frankly, Hezbollah and some radical Islamic groups that control large swaths, operationally speaking, of the U.S.-Mexico border. So they're actually, not only are they not trying to mitigate the damage, they're actually throwing fuel right into the fire, trying to make it worse. Look, Rita, I think that this is the issue. I think that this right now is the issue that Republicans have to run on right now. By the way, you know, in the 2020 election, when Donald Trump, who was extremely hawkish on the border, obviously, was running for re-election, Republicans made unprecedented gains in very Mexican areas there in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. They won multiple counties that were 80–90% Hispanic there. So this notion that if you talk very tough game on the border and you call for reasonable controls, cracking down on asylum fraud, no to amnesty, all these common sense things, the notion that that will cost you Latino, Hispanic votes is frankly an insult and a slap in the face to many commonsensical Latino and Hispanic voters, many of whom come from traditional Catholic families, actually, as the case may be. So I think that this is really the issue the Republicans should run on. We're coming up here in an election year, going back to what we were just talking about with Speaker Mike Johnson in the House. In the latest episode of my podcast, shameless plug, if I may, the Josh Hammer Show, I actually have a segment on the show where I'm giving unsolicited advice to Speaker Johnson and saying that this is the issue, man. Go all in on this issue. Try to pass as much common sense legislation as you can. It is great politics. It is great policy. Alejandro Mayorkas, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, is way out of his league. Impeachment articles should have been filed against him many months ago, as Andy Biggs of Arizona and other hard-right congressmen have called for. So I am all in on the immigration issue. I think Joe Biden is a dead man walking when it comes to this issue, and I hope that Republicans take advantage of that opportunity.
And finally, Josh, we've got more evidence of this two-tier justice system in America. Two BLM writers charged with burning down a Wendy's restaurant in Atlanta in the summer of 2020, the summer of love. Well, they've been fined just $500 each. It just highlights, Josh, this lack of justice, it appears, in the American justice system.
Yeah, and there's so many examples of this, right? So in New York City and San Francisco and many of these big blue metropolises that all too frequently have Soros prosecutors, as they have in New York City and San Francisco, you also see this trend where the DAs, they literally announce in advance they will not prosecute theft, petty larceny up to a certain dollar amount. So in New York City, I think for a little while, it was under $200. So, what is the incentive at that point? Well, you're going to rob $199 worth of merchandise. I mean, you don't need a PhD or anything to figure out what the incentive structure would get you to do. Same thing here. I mean, incentives matter, Rita. I mean, things like this are obviously going to lead to vastly more crime. They're obviously going to lead to much more larceny, theft, robbery, all sorts of things when it comes to but ultimately, to go back to what we were saying earlier, the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, is the glittering eye of the left. They love the Black Lives Matter movement, notwithstanding the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement happens to be emphatically pro-Hamas, not just pro-Palestinian. Recall earlier in the conflict, about 2 months ago now, the BLM Chicago chapter, they actually ended up deleting it, but they had this galling, horrific image of the Hamas paraglider, and they said, that's all you need to know, folks. But again, the Democratic Party has just gone so far off the deep end. They have become so besotted with this toxic ideology of oppressed versus oppressors, of victimizers versus victims, that they hold BLM, despite all that it stands for, out as the quintessence of what it means to be a liberal organization here. Of course, as you know, Rita, if a white Christian were to do the same thing, I don't have to tell you the fine would be substantially worse. Unfortunately, that's the reality.
Absolutely. Oh, if you look at what some of the sentences have been of those who participated in the January 6 riots as a comparison. Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Rita.